إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah, as a new class, at least for the coming few weeks and the month of Ramadan, we will go through the fiqh of zakat. Now, when it comes to knowledge in Islam, people by nature, the way that we are created, we like to listen to stories. We like stories from the Quran, stories from the Sunnah, and that is no doubt part of knowledge. But there's also part of knowledge that really takes concentration and dedication. And this is why you'll see in most masajid, just take into account the way that people are. Often you'll see many masjids that have classes on the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, classes on stories of the Prophets ﷺ, and stories in general. But not many places tackle issues like zakat, even though zakat, it's a pillar in the religion. It's a very important thing. And if you ask the average Muslim today, what do you know about zakat? They might say a sentence or two. When in reality, it is, when you look into the Quran, you will see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more often than not ties zakat with salah, right? And almost every time salah is mentioned in the Quran, it is mentioned alongside zakat. So the two go hand in hand. Yet the knowledge that we have about salah might be a good amount, but the knowledge that we have about zakat is lacking, to say the least. Now, zakat in Islam, as we've mentioned, it is one of the pillars. It is only preceded by two pillars, the shahada and the salah. And the point of zakat, the scholars in Islam, they say, it is to purify the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ. Meaning that this zakah, it is a way, a means for us to purify the wealth that we have. Now, since zakah is from amongst the pillars of the religion, the scholars in Islam, they agree that anyone that disputes the fact of zakah, that person is no longer a Muslim. This is by consensus of the scholars. If someone stands up and they say that there is no such thing as zakah in Islam, then all the scholars in Islam, they say this person is no longer a Muslim, denying the fact of zakah. However, if a person does not give zakah out of stinginess or out of laziness, then the scholars in Islam, they have difference of opinion. Okay, some of them, like Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, he mentions that the person who does not give zakah out of stinginess or laziness, then this person is a kafir, he is no longer a Muslim. And he uses many verses in the Quran that shows this fact, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of those who deny the zakah, that the only way they will come back as brothers It is if they make tawbah, if they repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُوا الزَّكَاةَ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ. Okay, then they are your brothers in the religion. So it is understood that if they do not do so, then they are not your brothers in faith. And subhanAllah, this is in contrast to other sins. For example, in Surah Al-Hujurat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Muslims fighting, killing each other, a fitna. Allah Azza wa Jalla says at the end of those verses, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً. Verily the believers are but brothers. فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. That the brothers, the believers are brothers, even though they fight against each other. And in other verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the one that kills another person, that they are فَمَنْ عُفِيَ لَهُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ شَيْءٌ, that whoever forgives his brother something, and the word here that is used is his brother, أَخِيهِ. So it shows that even though the sin of killing, which is a major sin, it does not take the person outside the fold of Islam, whereas denying a fundamental pillar in Islam, whether it is zakah or siyam or any of these fundamental aspects of the religion, if you deny it, then you're a kafir. And some scholars say if they do not give the zakah out of stinginess or laziness, then they become a kafir as well. And some of the scholars, they've said no, if a person does it out of stinginess, there are other ahadith from the Prophet ﷺ that shows us that it falls underneath the Mashiach, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the sense that there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ tells us that such a person, he will ثُمَّ يَرَى سَبِيلَهُ إِمَّا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ وَإِمَّا إِلَى النَّارِ. That the Prophet ﷺ said that this person, after being punished, he will either go to Jannah or he will go to the hellfire. So because of that, the scholars, they use this particular hadith speaking about the one who does not give the zakah. It shows that there's a severe punishment, but there is a possibility of that person going to Jannah. Now, the issue of zakah, the word zakah in Arabic, it means something that increases. Okay, this increase, it might sound strange. Zakah, it is something that you give, right? How is it possible that something that you give increases you? If you have $10 and you give me $5, did you increase or decrease? Literally, you decreased. You do not have $10 anymore, you have $5. But that increase, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That regardless of what you gave, even if it looks like you have less, in reality you have more. And the reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is far greater. And in Islamic terms, the scholars in Islam, they say that zakah is a specific amount of wealth that is given to a specific group, and the zakah, it is wajib, and it is part of the arkan of Islam. And when the Prophet ﷺ was speaking about the zakah, teaching his companions what to do when they go to other places, he told them specifically about the zakah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala افترض عليهم صدقة تؤخذ من أغنيائهم فترد في فقرائهم. So this is another way of explaining what the zakah is. The zakah, it is taken from those who have wealth, those who have means, and it is given back to those who are less fortunate. One misconception that people have about zakah, especially in this part of the world, amongst the Muslims, people think that zakah is only in terms of money. when in reality it is not just about money. The scholars in Islam, they've said there are 5 types or categories that there's zakat in. Okay? And it's good for us to know. Again, if you ask any random Muslim, what are the 5 categories that you should pay zakat in, they will not know. Even though this is an important thing, it is part of your religion, it is as fundamental as knowing about the salah. So these 5 types of the 5 categories that the scholars mentioned that there is zakat in, and this is important to remember. The first one that they mention is gold. Okay, there is zakat when it comes to gold. The other category is silver. There is zakat when it comes to silver. And the third category that scholars mention is bahimatul an'am, cattle. Okay, specific animals that are that people benefit from. Okay, and we'll go into detail what type of animals these are later on. The fourth type is whatever grows from the earth. There's a zakat on that. And also there is what is earned from business. Okay, the money that is used for business and the profit that you get from the business, there's zakat in that. So these are the 5 categories that the scholars in Islam mention. And there are certain parts that they dispute. There is ikhtilaf amongst the scholars, and those are such things as honey, right? The asal. Is there zakat on asal or not? And that's just one point that the scholars mention. And from amongst these 5 categories, obviously the scholars in Islam, they speak of the conditions. Everything in Islam, it has conditions, shurut. When it comes to salah, there's shurut. When it comes to siyam, fasting, there's shurut. By these conditions, we know who is supposed to be doing a particular deed and who is exempt, who is allowed to not perform it. And zakah is no different. And the scholars in Islam, they put down 5 shurut, 5 conditions. And again, this is important information to know, because if you know these 5 conditions, then you can apply them to yourself and you'll know, do I fit into this category? Do I have to give zakat or not? And most people, subhanAllah, they might go many years, perhaps their whole lives, without even realizing that they have to pay zakat. And this is the sad truth. So these 5 conditions that the scholars in Islam mention is, the first one is freedom. What do they mean by freedom? It means that the person should not be a slave. Okay? This was more applicable back in the day. And if a person finds themselves in a situation where they are a slave, then they are exempt, they do not have to pay zakat. Okay? So one of the first conditions is that the person is a free man or a free woman. If they are a free man and a free woman, then they fulfill that first condition. The second one, the second condition that the scholars mention is Islam. That the person has to be a Muslim. And it is important here to mention that zakah, by these conditions, it is not a must for a person that is a non-Muslim. Why? Because the verse that we mentioned before, the scholars in Islam, they say, Allah Azza wa Jalla said, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ. That this zakah, one of the things that it achieves is that it is a means of purification. And a person that is not a Muslim, he cannot be purified except through Islam in the spiritual sense. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu innamal mushrikuna najas, that they are najas, impure in the spiritual sense and sometimes even in the literal sense. So now you have the zakah. We know that one of the conditions is Islam, that the person has to be a Muslim in order for it to be obligatory upon them. But the interesting point here is that the scholars in Islam, they say, even though it is not obligatory upon them, they will still be asked about it. In the same way that they will be asked about Salah. When Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Quran, مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ, that what brought you to this place, saqar, the punishment, the adab. And then they will mention that we were not from amongst those who prayed, and we were not from amongst those who fed the poor, the needy people. And the scholars, they use this to show that they will be asked about the zakah. So we have Islam as the second point. And then the third point is the nisab. And the nisab, in simple terms, it is a threshold, a level. This level is what, if you go above it, you have to pay zakah. And if you're below it, you do not have to pay zakah. And the obvious question here is, what is the nisab? And the scholars in Islam, they say the nisab is slightly different in terms of actual money from one place to another place. Here in Canada, some scholars have put it just below or close to $5,000. So this means that if a person's wealth goes above the nisab, then it becomes a must for them to pay the zakah. And anything that is less than that, there is no zakah. The next point or condition that the scholars mention is something that they call istiqrar, and here it means that money that the person has, it is something that is tangible, it is something that they own completely. By this definition, you remove any contracts that a person has. There is no zakah on something that might cease to exist. Okay? And inshallah we'll explain this more in detail as we go on. And then the final condition is the hawl. And the scholars, they say that this usually means a year, that a year passes. But it does not always have to mean a year. There's exceptions to the rule, such as the zakah when it comes to the fruits, the thimar. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ. And the scholars in Islam, they say that means when those fruits or that thing, it is ripe, when it is ready. Okay? And people that do this kind of thing, they know that usually for some of these fruits it takes 4 months. So you do not wait a whole year, but in that case you give the zakah when that zakah is due. Another thing is, exception is animals. Okay? You do not have to wait a complete year as long as the amount of animals reaches a certain level. For the Shah, for example, it is 40 Shah, 40 sheep, and then there's the zakah. So if it reaches that level, then there's the zakah. You do not have to wait a year. Same thing goes for profits from businesses. That if you have profit from a business, you do not have to wait an entire year. As long as it has reached that nisab, there is zakah. So these are the 5 conditions that scholars mention that are conditions in order for the zakah to be wajib upon a person. Okay. If you paid attention, well, actually, Let's make it a little bit fun and interactive. Can you mention some of them? Does not have to be in order. Whatever you can mention, let's try to mention some of these conditions. Yes?
Nisab.
Nisab, good, mashallah. And what do we mean by the nisab?
I'm pretty sure the amount of things you have to make it that you have to make sadaqah.
Yes. So we say that the nisab is a threshold. Okay? A threshold meaning that if it goes beyond that, above it, then there is zakat that you have to pay. And if it's below it, you do not have to pay zakat. So when it comes to money, there's a certain threshold. When it comes to animals, there's a certain threshold, and they have all been mentioned in the Sunnah. So one of the points is nisab. Another point? Hurriya, good. Freedom, right? That the person is not a slave. So if a person is a free person, then there is then there is zakah. But if they find themselves in slavery, then there is no zakah on that person. Another point?
The individual has to be a Muslim.
Good. That the person has to be a Muslim. Islam is one of the conditions. And then it leaves two more points that we mentioned. Does anyone remember the two other points? Hawl, which sometimes means a year passes, and other times it means that the amount has been reached and that thing is ready. So it means different things in different situations. It does not always mean a complete year. And then we have the last one, which we said is the istiqrar, and that is that the person has to have mulk tam, and it takes out the contracts, anything that can cease to exist, and inshallah we'll explain that later on in the next class. So we have these 5 points, conditions. Do you notice that there's something that is missing from these? MashaAllah, yes. Bulugh, and another point that is missing that usually go together, bulugh and aql, right? So bulugh is that you reach the maturity, the age of puberty, and the aql is the intellect. And now you will find in the different madhabs amongst the different scholars, some of the scholars, they add this as a condition. They say that you need to be baligh and you need to be aqil. You need to have intellect, meaning you have to be sane. Okay, it does not mean that you have to have a high IQ. It just means that you're not insane. Okay, you're not majnoon. So if you are not majnoon, then you fulfill one condition, and the other condition is that you're not a child, you've reached the age of maturity. Now, some of the madhabs that I mentioned, like the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, he mentions this as a condition, these two. And other scholars like Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, that he mentions that he does not mention these two conditions in it. So now, why is there a difference? And this is an important point and a very good point to understand, because it is related to other rulings in Islam as well. So the issue why the scholars differ here is because if you think of zakah as ibadah, okay, only ibadah, then the scholars in Islam, they say you have to include these two conditions. If something is just ibadah, they say ibadatul mahd, that is complete ibadah. For example, salah, right? Then you add these two. But if something has connection with anything other than just ibadah, for example, it is haqqul mal. Okay. Now you have zakat, which is haqqul mal as well, right? Now, because of that, they say you do not have to have these two conditions. So the scholars in Islam, like Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, that mentioned that zakat is ibadah, just ibadah, he's saying that you have to mention that the person is of age and has sanity. And the other scholars in Islam that say no, the zakat, it is not only ibadah, but it is haqqul mal as well. They say you can take these two conditions out. So, in short, we do not have to go too much into the detail of more of the differences amongst the scholars, but for us to understand is that in simple terms, there are 5 conditions, and these 5 are freedom, Islam, nisab, the istiqrar, and the hawl that we mentioned. And zakat, it is not only in terms of money, but it touches on different categories. Some of the scholars, they've said these are 5 categories. Okay, to repeat them, zakat, there is zakat in gold, there is zakat in silver, there is zakat in cattle, and there is zakat from that which grows on earth, and there is zakat from the wealth that is put towards business or generated from business. So inshallah, we will stop here.